Alright, everyone, I am back and ready to continue. Now, before I move on to chapter 5, something I want to follow up on chapter 4 that I forgot to mention is I also kind of wanted to explore, a little bit on how Elizabeth felt about this whole thing, how she was adjusting to being an older sister, because I remember one of the few depictions of the Tudor children involving Mary by A.G. Art that I actually like, because I feel like it was actually a pretty good joke and not just a cheap, lowbrow. Sorry, I don't mean to be mean. It's just Artie and I have vastly creative differences. But anyways, there was one post actually that involved Mary that was actually funny for once and didn't seem like a cheap shot at a laugh. And I remember, those of you who follow Artie will probably know what I'm talking about. And I remember someone in the comment section of Pinterest, because that's where I first saw it, said, "Oh, this is probably inaccurate because it's most likely Mary. Mary most likely would have been just relieved that her troubles were over because she'd been through so much by this point, whereas Elizabeth would have been upset because, now that her brother was born, she'd lost her chance at the throne." And I mean, maybe it doesn't go that deep, and I guess it would be kind of hard to tell exactly how either of them reacted. Because again, when it comes to domestic affairs, those things are rarely ever recorded. But, anyways, even if that's going a little bit far, I could see it being that way. Because, in chapter 3, I had Mary actually being happy about the birth of her brother, and that's also kind of what I was going with. I kind of pictured her to just be relieved that her problems were over at that point. Like, finally, my dad got the son that he's so desperately wanted, so now maybe we can finally have some sense of normalcy or something a little less bad. I don't know what she'd be thinking, but Elizabeth, although maybe at that age wouldn't necessarily be thinking about the throne, because like I said, she was around 3 or 4, she was very young, may have been prone to a little bit of jealousy, considering that when she was born, although her dad wasn't too happy about it, when she was welcomed in, she kind of got all of the attention that Mary had previously gotten, and she was being hailed as the new princess, while Mary was kind of being tossed to the side. So I could picture maybe Elizabeth being a little bit jealous, feeling a little left out now that little baby Edward is getting all this attention. So, yeah, that's another thing in chapter 4 that I kind of wanted to explore. And now we can move on to chapter 5. And in this chapter, I kind of concocted this plan that Jane would be able to have some involvement in raising her baby. And I'll leave the nurse's reasoning up to you guys, but kind of my reasoning is that maybe she got the physician involved, and because the physician in this case would actually be the husband of my midwife character, Grace, he would probably say, "Oh, recent scientific development is showing that babies tend to be better tempered when they're being hand-raised by their mothers instead of some random stranger." And considering that Henry's more likely to listen to the men, especially a male physician, I could probably see him going along with that. Again, this is just my suspicions. I can't tell you for sure exactly what happened, but before I start going on a tangent or rambling, let's just move on, because that's just kind of the first part of the chapter. Of course, this is unfortunately where things get really real. And this is when Jane, this is me kind of going along with this one theory that I heard where nobody knew that she was sick until the day before she died, though in this case it's technically the day she did die. I don't know. I don't think, it's kind of hard to tell exactly what happened, because some people say that was the case, some people say they knew she was sick but forced her to go to the baby's christening. I don't know, but nevertheless, what we do know is she developed the fever around 3 days after her baby's birth, which I did read is about the timeline that it does take for symptoms of childbed fever, now known as puerperal fever, to set in. And so anyways, she's trying so hard to convince everyone that she's getting better until one day when she's going for a walk in the garden with Edward and the girls, and that's when it finally becomes too much for her to hide anymore, because this is when she gets short of breath, she's dizzy, she's overwhelmingly nauseous, and again, what exactly caused her death is debatable, but I did read that one of the complications of childbed fever is a pulmonary embolism, which is when a blood clot develops in the leg and then breaks off and travels through the blood and plugs up an artery in the lung. So that, combined with the fact that most women were put on strict bed rest after their baby's birth and therefore wouldn't be moving around a lot, it seems pretty plausible. So this chapter is her kind of coming to terms with her death, because obviously she only has so much time to really process it, and I don't know, some people may think that it's abnormally fast, but I kind of did take a little creative liberty with that for the sake of the story, but some could argue that because she didn't have much time to process her death, she had no choice but to accept it. And at this point, I kind of took a little bit of inspiration from the Pixar movie Onward, where the main character, Ian, I think it's Ian, it's been forever since I've seen that movie, he's sort of going over his list of things that he wanted to do with his dad, and that's kind of when he realized that he did all of that with his older brother Barley. And in this case, Jane is kind of mourning the fact that she won't get to see her baby grow up. She won't get to see his first steps or his first words or his first birthday, any of that stuff that she'd planned right after she met him for the first time after he was born. But then she remembers a conversation that she'd had with Catherine of Aragon, how Catherine, she'd delivered a stillborn baby, and that was hard for her, but ultimately she realized that she couldn't regret what she had done because she actually lost the baby not long after that time when she had rode in a battle and defeated the leader of the rival army. I can't remember exactly who it was, but whatever. So that's kind of when Jane comes to the realization that she won't forget and can't regret what she did for the love of her baby. And then she's faced with a whole new challenge, which is, what does she tell the girls? And that's kind of when we get a little bit of how Mary and Elizabeth react. Mary is immediately overwhelmed with grief, and she reacts by lashing out at Elizabeth, because really that's how she handles things, is, because she has some trouble with vulnerability, she tends to immediately react with anger. And Elizabeth, she's so young that she doesn't quite understand that her stepmother is dying, because, she thinks, I've had a fever before. Lots of people get fevers and then they get better. And so she tries to console Mary, thinking, this blanket is what made me feel better, so Mary just needs to feel better. The simple logic of a child. And eventually they get called into Jane's room, and that's kind of when she has to deliver the news to them, that she's not going to get better. But she kind of eases the fact by helping them remember all of the fun times that they've had together. Because as long as they have that, it's almost like she's still with them. I feel like I kind of picked that up somewhere, because I pick up a lot of what I have in different places, but I don't know. It'll come back to me. If I remember it, I'll put it in the comment section on where exactly I got that. But I don't know, maybe it was VeggieTales, though in the context of VeggieTales it was a lot less dark. If you've seen the episode Rack, Shack, and Benny, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. But Anyways, this chapter was definitely very new for me because I'm no stranger to fan fiction, but I've never written a story where a character ever dies before. So this was definitely a test of my skills, and it was definitely a new field for me, and I hope that I succeeded. I mean, it kind of helped that I was borrowing from real life events, but the fact that I kind of had to recreate what may have happened only based on factual information and the emotional stuff was kind of left up to me. You know, I felt like that was kind of, I don't know. I feel like that was definitely a challenge for me, but not in a bad way. I liked being challenged. I liked getting a chance to try something new. Even if it came with a lot of self-doubt and me constantly questioning myself, but whatever. So, I also kind of decided to incorporate a little bit of the lyrics in Heart of Stone when she's saying goodbye to her baby, you know, the soon I'll have to go, I'll never see you grow. Yeah, you see, I did that one because I heard apparently that those were the lyrics in the original version where it was more apparent that she was talking to baby Edward. So, I mean, I can kind of understand why they changed it for the stage version because I think it would be a little bit weird for her to be singing to her son when he's nowhere to be seen. And she's just singing to the audience, but anyways, so I have that. And then that brings us to chapter 6, which is definitely the shortest out of all the chapters, not including the epilogue. And this one I kind of got from what I'd heard of accounts of near-death experiences, but I also kind of wanted to jazz it up a little bit and sort of create an afterlife that would expand on the environment built up by the musical, because some people go with the whole reincarnation thing, which is understandable, but I don't know. That doesn't quite sit right with me, maybe because I personally don't believe in reincarnation, so I would find that a little far-fetched. So instead, I picture it to be set in some sort of an afterlife where the audience is also part of the show, sort of representing the people in heaven, or whatever afterlife you want to think of it as, who are watching the show. You know what I mean. Because, you know, to me personally, it's heaven, but I kind of want to leave it up to my readers to determine whatever kind of afterlife they imagine it to be. Because I incorporated, you know, some biblical elements, but I also wanted to create more of like a personalized version. One that would be, again, kind of recreate the environment of the show, and also kind of give Jane an opportunity to study music, which she never really got to do in her lifetime, because, I mean, it's entirely possible that that was her choosing and that she really didn't like music, but in my story, I kind of created it that her mother, though loving, was also a little bit overbearing and wanted her daughter to be a proper young lady and thought that music was improper for a young lady. But anyways, so this is the chapter where she reunites with Anne and Catherine and can sort of gain their forgiveness. And again, I also this is also where I kind of wanted to build on her relationships with them. You know, kind of about how she still carries this tremendous guilt and sort of emphasizes her flaw of, you know, cares too much. Where she holds on to this intense sorrow for something that really wasn't her fault, and this is Anne and Catherine finally putting that to rest and telling her what happened was not your fault. And of course with Anne, I threw in a little bit of my best attempt at raunchy humor, because I'm not all that great at raunchy humor, but I don't know, hopefully you guys liked it. I'm not so sure. And I kind of had it where she was being greeted by a little boy, and whoever's kid that is, I can leave that up to you guys. It's definitely either Catherine or Anne's, but I want to leave that up to you, because you know, I could picture Jane sort of being a mother figure to the children that they lost in their lifetime, considering how much of a mother figure she was to Mary. And that's also kind of what leads us into the epilogue that I created, which originally I was gonna have this be a little longer, where it would kind of, it was sort of the same thing where it's set after one of the performances. She's at a really low point. She is missing her husband and her son, and she's having a hard time fitting in with all the others. She's, you know, kind of at a low point. And originally I was planning on May, Parr's daughter. I'm calling her May, because if I called her by her real name Mary, that would get way too confusing. So, I was originally going to have her kind of toddle in, and then Jane would hold her for a little bit, and then she would try and find Parr, and then Parr would kind of talk to her about how she feels unfit as a mother because she barely even got to know her since she died before it could really happen, and also because of the stuff that went down with her and Thomas and Elizabeth, which I may get into in another video, but let's just say I feel like there's one thing that's covered very much that sounds way more plausible than her actually assisting Thomas or doing nothing about it. But honestly, I believe it was more of a case of when she found out what Thomas did, she was pregnant and knew she'd be bedridden and knew that she wouldn't be able to protect Elizabeth, so she sent her away for her own safety. There, I said it. But anyways, I was originally planning for that, but I couldn't figure out a way to really make it flow well or fit, so I just kind of skipped straight to the part where Edward was reuniting with her, and Henry's mother, Elizabeth of York, kind of helped get him going, encouraged him to really meet her. And similar to Jane, he also harbors some guilt, thinking that he caused her death and that he caused her so much suffering and that he didn't do enough to defend his sisters in his lifetime from their father. And Jane, I kind of have them exchange the song If I Never Knew You from Pocahontas, because I feel like I feel like it could work in that context too, since it's just a song about, you know, if I never knew you, if I never felt this love, I would have no inkling of how precious life could be. So I feel like with those lyrics, it could still be applied here. And so that is kind of where it wraps up really nicely. And it's sort of about Edward moving on from his past lifetime and moving on to this lifetime, kind of like how Jane had to move on from her past life, deal with the fact that her husband wouldn't be joining her, but that's okay because she has the girls and she has her son, and that's what's most important to her. So yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say for this story.